Hello, and welcome to The Whole Equation. What do you think was the biggest leap in film technology? Perhaps it's Technicolor in the 1930s. Maybe widescreen in the 1950s. Or modern-day digital technology. Personally, I'd argue the biggest change was the leap from silent film to sound.
What's the matter, R.F.?
The jazz singer, that's what's the matter, the jazz singer.
The first talkie, The Jazz Singer, had only contained a few lines of dialogue, but nevertheless had been a huge commercial success. Within a year, Hollywood was releasing its first full talking pictures. But as anybody who's watched an early talkie can attest, they can be very strange.
Take him for a ride. Oh.
For example, the acting often seems very poor
Everybody come out of the court.
and punctuated with awkward silences.
I'd like a word with you, Dr. Bassan.
The camera movement is also incredibly slow, and the frames often cut actors in half. And there's even something off about the aspect ratios, which are sometimes close to square. Because of this, very few films of this era, roughly from 1928 to 1932, are considered classics today. So why are these early sound films so odd? And how, in just a few years, did Hollywood go from this into its golden age?
Gotta dance, Broadway rhythm.
Sound recording had been around for at least as long as the movie, but early sound recording equipment was poor.
Cut!
Microphones needed to be very near actors, so they were either scattered around the set or placed high above.
There's a microphone right there, in the bush.
Conscious of this problem, studios insisted that to improve vocal quality, actors should take diction lessons
Ta-te-tee-to-too.
and speak more slowly and deliberately.
Ta-te-tee-to-too.
This was part of the reason why acting in early sound films seemed so unnatural and stilted.
Yes, and it's going to be tough on the guy who did it.
To further complicate this, early microphones were omnidirectional, meaning they picked up sound in all directions. This was a huge problem, as cameras at the time created a constant whirring sound. To overcome this, cameras were placed in large soundproof booths, which filtered out the unwanted sound. However, this had several drawbacks. The bulky booths made repositioning the camera difficult, which meant the actors were sometimes cut out of the frame. The booths also explain the lack of camera movement in early sound films. In silent movies, cameras could be moved freely on dollies to allow for more dynamic images. But in the early sound era, cameras were limited to short, slow pans. To solve this, cameras began to be housed inside soundproof blimps. And whilst these were slightly more agile, they were still incredibly heavy. However, this prompted studio technicians to develop the camera crane. Within a decade, cranes became a powerful tool used by directors to create breathtaking shots. Another more subtle, but arguably larger problem in early sound films was the inability to mix sound in post-production. Since at least the early 1920s, films had developed a complex grammar, which included long shots, mediums, close-ups, joined together through editing. For sound films to achieve the same effect, it was necessary to film the scene with multiple cameras for the first time, which would each capture a different perspective. If this wasn't done, it would have been impossible to synchronize the sound across different shots. So if a scene was to include a soundtrack, the music had to be recorded live on set. However, the difficulty of coordinating the musicians and the actors in a live setting meant scenes often left the music out, leaving behind awkward silences.
Say, That was him you just shook hands with over there. What?
In order to fill these moments, sound engineers developed sound mixing technology, which would allow different soundtracks to be combined in post-production. This, for the first time, gave filmmakers unprecedented control over the sound which would be played, and a new tool to manipulate the audience. While soundtracks had existed in the silent era, usually written for piano or organ, it wasn't guaranteed the music would be played live, especially when the films were shown in smaller theatres or internationally. By 1932, directors could not only add music in post-production, but also sound effects, such as in the groundbreaking King Kong. And indeed, the talkie in many ways heralded the death of the experimentation and rapid progress which had characterized the silent era. For example, silent filmmakers like Chaplin often varied the frame rate of recording to suit the scene. However, the need to play music at the correct tempo and pitch meant that films now became standardized at 24 frames per second. Likewise, the square frames, caused by printing sound onto 35mm film, fell foul of the newly created Academy, who insisted all films should use the 4:3 ratio, placing black bars onto the picture if necessary. Sound meant that filmmaking had become an increasingly complex and expensive process. Naturally, the script became paramount, and silent auteurs like Chaplin, D.W. Griffith, and Buster Keaton, who had relied on improvisation, failed to adapt to the changing medium. So, with the triumph of sound, film entered the modern age, but also, inevitably, lost something along the way.